And thank you so much to all our wonderful sponsors. And welcome to Words Number 7. I'm Janice Solf, and I've been here for the last 7 years, been one of the hosts, and very proud to be associated with Words. And I welcome all of you. We have a very big crowd tonight, so pull up a chair, make yourselves comfortable. I'm going to introduce you to a wonderful writer in just a few minutes. But first, I would like to acknowledge that here in London, Ontario, that's where I'm located, and where Words calls home at Museum London, we're between the Great Lakes. And this is very important land because where we are is the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and the Attawandarand peoples. These lands are connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with the One Spoon Covenant Wampum. This land continues to be the home to diverse Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. Well, I was trying to think of the best way to introduce Jesse Thistle to you. He, of course, is a well-known author and writer, a professor of Métis Studies at York University. He's been honored with the Governor General's Academic Medal and is both a Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation Scholar and also a Vanier Scholar. Jesse, as you know, has written a best-selling memoir, From the Ashes, and we'll put that link up for you later so that you can directly buy it from Western's bookstore. And the book is about being Métis, abandoned at the age of 3, eventually becoming homeless on the streets of Toronto, Ottawa, and Vancouver. And against all odds, Jesse pulls himself from the depths of destruction and drug addiction and alcoholism. For many years, Jesse was in and out of jail. He'll tell us some stories about that, and rehab, where miraculously he managed to get his high school diploma, eventually earning a university degree, becoming an assistant professor, where he is today at one of Canada's most well-known universities. And all of this, of course, is critical information to introduce Jesse Thistle to you. But I think a much better description is to say, in just 2 words, Jesse Thistle, truth teller.
Thank you.
What do you think about that?
I love it. Thank you very much. And thank you for, I feel very humbled and to come into this space. Storyteller too. I think storyteller. Like that's what my community, the way they look at me. So that's the way I kind of see myself. All those titles are nice, but really I'm just a guy who tells stories.
Yeah, a guy who tells stories very well. But when I say truth teller, I thought about this as I was reading chapter after chapter. You are very brave. You go to the edge and then you go further with the reader. You don't hold anything back. There's no flowery language here.
No, and this has to do with my training as a scholar. I think I know that trauma has to be witnessed and acknowledged. That's part of, like, if you look at the work of Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart, she talks about how there needs to be a public witnessing of trauma to move through it. And so for Indigenous peoples like me and my family, this was our one shot to tell what happened to us. And so I wanted to make it as public as I could. And that means talking about my scars, my stars, and my warts. You know what I mean? Yes. And so that's why I crossed the line and shared the way I did.
But you're not afraid to take us as far as possible. And I mean, here you are talking about this is part of your Indigenous culture, but for so many years you didn't embrace it, and no. Which is part of what led you to this destruction, self-destruction.
Yeah, it was a reaction to early childhood trauma and dislocation from my family. That was, my family was out in Saskatchewan, and they were Métis Cree, and we were severed from that, put through the system, and then ended up in white suburban Brampton. I know demographics have changed quite a bit from then, but back then I was ashamed to be Native because I got teased about it, and that internalization of basically colonialism to deny who you are, right? It's like, well, if you look at the work of Frantz Fanon, he talks about that. That was what was happening with me. That's the final stage of colonialism, the final stage of assimilation, self-hate. But I remember looking in the mirror and not even seeing an Indigenous person looking back at me. And so I had to write with that truth because that was my truth. when I was growing up. And for a lot of disconnected Indigenous peoples that were adopted, that is the truth of their existence. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
And but let's start where the book begins. Well, not quite at the beginning. I want to start with being abandoned by your taken from your mother by your father,
Yeah.
and you go to where was it in Saskatchewan?
Moose Jaw, we went. We lived there for a bit, a couple of little while, and then my dad showed up one day.
Okay. And then you were 3 and your
Yeah.
brother was 4
4.
and I believe Josh, your older brother, was 5.
Yes. But closer to like 6, 5, and 4. Like I was 3.5 when that happened. Yeah.
But you lived in a small apartment and your dad would leave you at night, sometimes for hours or days.
Yeah, yeah. He had an addiction issue. He was a heroin addict. He drank and he was suffering from his own trauma. And he would leave us alone to go look for drugs and or drug money. He taught me how to steal from convenience stores and whatnot when I was very young with my brothers. And so he kept leaving us alone. And we were called, the neighbor across the street, across the way, across the hall noticed that he was doing this enough times and called CAS. And that's how we were scooped out of the care of my father. Now, it must have happened quite a bit if she noticed, right? I don't notice what my neighbors are doing all the time, right?
Yeah.
So she must have been, seeing him do this quite a bit. I remember him not being there, and so do my brothers, but I think it was more extensive than even I remember. So,
But the night that they the cops showed up at your apartment, you guys were on the floor with a turnip.
yeah, hacking it away, eating turnip, I still don't like turnip because of that. You know that? I remember the
Mhm.
way it sounded when it dropped on the ground. It sounded like a bomb going off. It was kind of metaphorical for the incident that actually happened, that destroyed our family. And yeah, that's what we were eating. We were drinking half full beer bottle in the fridge. I remember drinking beer at a young age for hunger actually. And so yeah, just not a nice guy, my father. I'd like to find him one day and just get into a nice fist fight with him, and then maybe after give him a hug,
Yeah, yeah.
and
But
forgive him.
that night, what happens? What you 3 boys do, you don't just open the door.
No, we run out. My brother Jerry had this there's this big industrial vent in our building, in the room beside the bunk beds, and Jerry had opened the grate, and we hid inside there, and we were hiding like my dad had told us to do. And my brother was really good with this like rope thing he attached to the back of it, and that's where we almost hid, and the police almost didn't see us, but they did see us. And so in that way, as soon as they saw we were in there, and they heard that there was drugs and stuff in the apartment, and then they found needles, that's when we were scooped and taken into state care. And what I don't tell the reader, and what I want people to like meditate on while they're reading that book, is why did they call my white grandparents? Why didn't they just call my mom and send us back home?
Mhm.
Well, because back in the 80s and 70s, they didn't call Indigenous mothers when they needed to place the children, right? They called white families. And that's how we ended up scooped in Brampton with my paternal grandparents.
So your identity was taken from you essentially at age 3.
Yeah, yeah, and I argue in some of my scholarship that that's actually when I became homeless, because there was a disconnection of kin and family. And
Mhm.
I've talked with other residential school survivors and scoop survivors who describes similar kind of cultural, spiritual, and dislocation from identity that happens when you're taken from your nuclear family and your culture. So
So your life might have turned out very differently if you'd gone back to your mother. You might not have continued this
it could
cycle.
have. It could have, but my mom had mental health challenges of her own, and she was quite young. And back where my mom and my family come from in Saskatchewan, there wasn't much opportunity on the road allowances or in PA, Prince Albert, or Saskatoon for Indigenous peoples. And I know a lot of my cousins, they got involved heavily in gangs in the 90s, and so I probably would have gone that route. So I don't know if I would have been better off. I often think about that.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
You were we don't find that out this until much later in the book, near the end, that your aunt, I think, says to you that you're Michif road allowance people.
Yes,
What does that mean? And did I pronounce it right?
you did. Thank you very much. Yeah, Michif road allowance people are basically the Métis who fought alongside Louis Riel in the 1885 Northwest Resistance. At least portions of them were. And my family were resistance fighters. We fought there at Batoche, as well as in 1870 and 1869 in Red River, what is now Winnipeg. And so, because we were triumphant in defending our rights in 1870, Sir John A. Macdonald held a personal grudge towards Riel and his people. And then by the time the 1885 Northwest Resistance broke out 15 years later in Saskatchewan, he was goading the Métis to war so that he could take our land, basically. And they did that. They defeated us. They um, went through a process called scrip. So these were little coupons that they would give Métis people to extinguish their Aboriginal right to land or title that was enshrined in the Royal Proclamation. This is something that the Crown has to enter into to extinguish Indigenous land so that they can sign treaty and then give it away to settlers. And so with the Métis, after our collective loss, the government entered into the scrip system where we were faced with the option of either getting one of these individual land plots or selling it away for cheap. And that most sold it away for cheap because the land we were given wasn't good anyways.
Mhm.
And so because we looked Indigenous and we didn't have land and we weren't treated collectively like First Nations are with treaty, we came to squat on the sides of the roads and railways in these public strips of land that was Crown land. So it's kind of like ironic that the one force that kind of dispossessed us came to shelter us basically because we were out of the way on that land. And that's where our communities formed from 1885 all the way up until my grandmother, my grandfather, my mushum and cookum, my mom's time, and then me and as a young child on the road allowance when our communities fall apart.
And I wanted to ask you about Mushroom and Kukum because they're your Indigenous grandparents
Yes,
who
they are.
lived in this road allowance
Yeah.
area in Saskatchewan.
Yeah. Big
And
River, around Big River. Yeah.
okay, and this is where the book opens, and
Yes, it
you're
is.
happy with them.
I am. I don't know this traumatic history of the Métis. I just know that I'm with my cookum and we're picking Saskatoons, and
Mhm.
she's teaching me how to be a good relative to all the animals, to the insects, not to take more berries than I need, to be mindful that the insects have jobs and they're our relatives too, just as the berries and the animals are. And so I'm in what's called our Wakutuwin. I'm connected to the land, I'm connected to my kin. So to me, it was awesome to go visit them, right?
Mhm.
Like any kid that goes to see their grandparents. I remember my grandfather's beaded vest and my cookum's big glasses, like huge. She looked like Uncle Junior from Sopranos, his glasses kind of. Yeah, that's what, and but they were, I loved it. I like going there. I like seeing them. And I remember their stove. They had like this potbelly black stove that they would cook bannock on top of. So
But she had these big round Coke bottle glasses, but she could see what other people couldn't see.
yes, yeah, way better. She could see better than I could. And apparently she had one of her eyes was damaged from when she was a kid. And she could ride bareback and shoot a shotgun with one hand. Like she was a quite capable woman, right? Like most Michif women are.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Incredible. So, but you left her at a very young age, and that
I
was
did.
the beginning of
Yes. Yeah.
the dissolution of Jesse Thistle.
Yeah, right. And like if you look at the structure of the book and the way that it's that's the first opening scene is positioned that way because I'm still in the love of my community,
Mhm.
and then it abruptly ends. And I spend the rest of my life trying to find that love, love of community, love of self, love of connection to all that stuff was missing. That's the great damage that happened in my life. And so that's what that means. That's why it abruptly changes so fast. And then the tone of the book goes right into almost like darkness right away. And it doesn't emerge until the last third or quarter of the book.
It's very painful for the reader when it's so abrupt, but that's deliberate. And it feels like, and I think I heard you say this, some are shards of glass
Yes.
That's
That's right.
deliberate.
Yeah, it is. It is. And because the trauma itself was sharp like that, the sharp edges of the world just got me like a fish as a child. And I had to write about that because that explains why I turned into the thief and the addict. And I believed all the stereotypes that were fed to me about Indigenous people. So it's no wonder I ended up living them out in my adulthood. But that trauma was really the source of it. It wasn't because Indigenous people are that way. It's because the way that the state treated me and my brothers. And so I wanted to articulate that as clear and as concisely as I could.
So aside from articulating it, you make us feel it.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's exactly what I tried to do. I could have went like the essay route with my book, which, I'm a professor, I can write like that.
Mhm.
But I chose to choose with the most sparsest language that I have, but to make you feel what colonialism and the institutions behind it feel like from the inside,
Mhm.
and to show it to you from the perspective of a child, right?
Yeah.
Where it's just discombobulating, it's wounding, and then all of a sudden you're confused and you're in a different city and you're just supposed to cope, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that pain for a child, when a child can't articulate it, we feel what it's like to be in a child's shoes and constantly disrupted and stolen away and not having an identity and but trying to figure yourself out but not knowing exactly what you're trying to figure out. And there's a scene where in the book, well, it's not a scene, it happened to you with your friend Brian. He was your good friend at
Yes.
school, and you were very close, and you discover a bird's nest.
Yes. Yes. One of the most painful. I sobbed when I wrote that.
I love that.
I sobbed. It's like it's the closest I let people into my child heart,
Yeah,
and that's something that I live with up until very recently. And I can read it to everyone if that's what you guys want me to do. And then I'll tell you a little nice story that's attached to it.
please.
Okay. So it's called Robin's Eggs. My friend Brian, who lived down the street, told me he had a secret one day and that if I kept my mouth shut, he'd show me. I promised not to tell a soul, and Brian showed me a robin's nest in his backyard. Every day, Brian and his family put seeds beside the nest to feed the mother robin before she went foraging in the afternoon. She would leave at the same time every day, 4:30 p.m. on the dot. I remember looking at those eggs in wonder. There were three of them, and they were so beautiful, bright baby blue tucked into the yellowed grass and mud of the nest. I imagine the eggs carefully positioned by their mother's feet, protected under her soft feathers and guarded by her watchful eye. Brian's mother called him in for dinner. I'll wait for you here and watch over the eggs while you eat, I said. Assured, my buddy Brian left. As soon as he did, I grabbed those eggs and put them in my sock and ran home. As soon as on the way, I slipped and fell and I broke those eggs. Shocked at what I'd done, I threw the sock in the sewer and then hid in my grandparents' basement. About a half hour later, Brian's parents showed up, Mr. and Mrs. T. Mr. T was a police officer, but was kind to me and my brothers, and sometimes even played catch with us neighborhood kids. Mrs. T was even nicer, always baking up batches of cookies for Brian and me when we played Montezuma's Revenge on his Commodore 64, the only high powered computer on our street. My grandmother searched the house and found me shivering behind a stack of boxes. I'm really sorry, I said when I was confronted about the eggs and told them what I'd done. Brian cried. He was heartbroken. Why did you steal the eggs? Brian's mother asked. I broke down into a blubbering mess. The more they asked me, the more I bawled. But I didn't tell them why I did it. My parents gave me the licking of my life, but I didn't break. I still didn't tell them why I stole those eggs. When I saw Brian the next day at school, he wouldn't talk to me. The truth is, when I saw the three eggs tucked into the nest, it reminded me of my brothers and me in our home in Saskatchewan. I thought of how much that mother robin loved those eggs and how well she and Brian's family took care of them, and I got jealous. So I took the eggs. I thought that if I had them in some way, I'd have them the same love the eggs had. And that would mean in some way I'd have a mother's love again. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I stole those eggs. I was a bad kid, right? And that's what kids do when they act out and they miss their moms. And there's another story in there where I rip up a magazine and I put the pictures beside me to be beside her body because I missed her body. Anyway, so I read this story at the National Arts Gallery in Ottawa right before COVID hit, and it was all dark. I'm on stage and the lights are on, so I can't see who's there. And so I read that, and we're talking about the meaning of it, like we are here. And at the way at the back on the one side, a tall guy stands up and he's like, "Hey, man." He's like, "Now I know why you took the eggs." And I'm like, "Brian?" It was Brian. He's a grown man now. And he's like, I'm sorry, dude. I didn't mean to. He's like, "I understand now." He's now an MP in Ottawa. His name's Ryan Turnbull. You guys can look him up and ask him this story and the story of the eggs. And
Just isn't that I,
oh, this is
like
full
coming
circle coming around, and now we've rekindled our friendship. I went back to see Mr. and Mr. T. Mrs. T had a stroke, and she's not doing too well, but he remembered me quite well, and I remember him quite fondly. And
and he didn't know the closure of that story and why you did it until you spoke at the National Gallery.
no, no, he didn't, because I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anyone, and so all these years, this old man, me, a middle-aged man, him, a middle-aged man, hearing what was motivating me as a child. And he was one of my best friends. I grew up with him. So
Amazing story. Did you have that story in your head all these years before you wrote it in From the Ashes?
I might have had the guilt of like wanting to have a family like that and to do something because I lost control, right? I lost control. I just wanted that so badly, and I just stole it because my dad had taught me how to steal, right? And my brothers were stealing with me. And so I learned at a very young age that if I wanted something, I just took it. And like that would save me later in my life when I was on the streets.
Mhm.
But like at that age, I just lost myself to my impulses. And I've always felt bad for that. I always did. I always did, and I felt bad for like hurting those robins, you know. I didn't mean to do that either. It wasn't about that, right? And so I don't know what I was going to do with the eggs, to tell you the truth. I just wanted them, so I took them.
What was school like for you?
Rough. It was rough. I grew up in majority white Brampton back in the day, you know, and I'd get into a lot of fights and get beat up a lot. Me and my buddy Leroy, Newfie guy. Newfies are awesome. I love Newfies. And we would kind of tag up together and beat up other kids that were messing with us. And
Mhm.
I don't know, it's just stuff that young boys do, but it was difficult. And I didn't learn to read properly. I wasn't very good at school. I was targeted or labeled as a kid that didn't want to pay attention or a trouble starter. And so it was rough.
And when people would call you a dirty Indian, a horrible racial slur, you would you would not admit that you had an indigenous background.
No, that I did at first. Like when I was at first in grade school, my brother Josh told everybody that we lived in a teepee one summer in Saskatchewan, and we got beat up, worked over for that one so much. But as time progressed, I learned like it was easier to just tell people that I was Italian or some other Mediterranean person because I kind of looked. No, you can't really tell what I am, right? And so that's what I did. That was my strategy, right? And I've heard from other indigenous peoples that grow up dislocated that they do the same thing.
Mhm.
And that's really sad to think about.
But yet your brothers embrace their indigenous background. At one point, I think your older brother, comes out of the school, and
Yeah.
he has this spiritual awakening of some sort, and you don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, no, he's I don't know what it was. It's almost like he was seeing the future of what was to come.
Mhm.
He described it to me after, like when I was writing the book, and he's like, "Yeah, I just saw you, and like as you were, what you would become, so
Mhm.
homeless and all those things, which and the teachers were trying to help him, and I was there, but I was stoned. I was already into drugs at this time, and I just lost interest in my brother and turned my back on him when he needed me the most. And this was something that I did to both of my brothers, and that wounded me. It still carry that with me today. I can never get that back, you know. Um, but they were always ones to embrace their culture. A
Yes.
lot of people think that it's me and our family that brought our indigeneity back because I'm so well known. It was really my brothers who were the braver ones that knew it and were proud, and I was just a coward and made fun of them. So
But they must be so incredibly proud of you.
I don't know about that. My one brother is, my other one, we're not really, we're kind of at odds right now. We'll be back though. Brother sibling rivalry, you know. That's what it
He'll,
is.
he'll come around. He'll
Yeah.
come around. I mean, because what you've done is remarkable for I think your insights into where you've come from, where your ancestors have come from, and where the disconnect is and how it needs to be fixed. A lot of people are going to learn from your book and already have.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's pretty powerful. Do you want to talk about jail? Um,
Jail.
yeah, let's talk about jail because
Sure.
meet. I mean, they're as painful as this book is, and there are so many incidents that are painful. There's also some moments of kindness,
Yeah,
and you meet some remarkable people in jail. A guy named Priest.
I do. Yeah. Yeah. A priest was one of my good friends, and the guy actually saved my life. If when I look back, I had a really severe infection, staphylococci infection in my right foot because of a failed calcaneus surgery. I was the cause of the failure of the surgery. But when I got in there, like in jail, the stalls are where guys do their business, and so that place is really dangerous for Hep C, Hep A, Hep B, and it's actually the most scary thing in jail is not the fighting; it's the diseases that you catch. Right, you can catch tuberculosis really easy, and so when I was going into the shower one time, this man saved my life in a way, and I have a story about that. If you guys want me to read that, I don't know how you want. Yeah,
Please,
okay,
please.
all right. When you first started talking about jail, you're like, let's talk about jail. It's like, do you want to trade 3 peanut butters for 4 sugars? You know, hold on. That's a little jail, inside jail lingo there. Sorry.
Yeah, inside jail. Well, we could
Yeah.
talk about the sugar trade if you want, because that's an
Yeah.
interesting part of the book.
Before Priest was shipped off to processing, he offered me some advice. Indian, listen, I've exhausted my appeals. It's over for me. The look on his face was of utter defeat and worry. It was an expression I hadn't seen on his face since I met him sometime earlier. It'll be all right, bro, I said. Just keep to yourself, read, work out, draw, that kind of thing. I'll try. But shit's crazy down there. At least I'll get conjugal visits after a while. Priest cracked a half smile and his eyes glazed over. Anyway, Thistle, listen. You have 2 official duties in this job. First, you have to make the inmates read the rules when they first enter the range and make them shower. People need to be clean. If they don't listen, you have to bang them out. You're the first line of defense against the disease and nastiness of this place. The guys depend on you. Second, you have to distribute the food fairly, which I know you'll do, because Lauriston taught you well. It was true. Lauriston had taught us guys the value of sharing and how to maintain order. Is that it? I asked, knowing that the quartermaster job was much more complex. Of course not. You have to keep the dope and tobacco flowing, and you have to pass the lighters to other inmates on other ranges. You do that through the cleaners who mop the floors, or who mop the halls, sorry. They come at 8:30 sharp every morning. You pass the lighter to them, they pass it to the other inmates, and then they pass it back. Here. Simple. Priest handed me the purple lighter I'd seen used many times on our range. I grabbed it and rammed it in my jumpsuit pocket. When the screws come to shake down the range, Priest stressed, it's your job to hoop the lighter. You have to stick it up your ass and fast. And don't give me that face. I've had to do it for 2 years straight. Do you know how many times I've been intimate with that thing? The laugh I let out released relaxed priest for a second. For the first time in our conversation, I felt happy he could ease up, if only for a second. Use soap if you can. Slip the lighter up. If not, you're taking the dry hammer. It doesn't matter. Just get it up there. I know it sucks, but that lighter is power. People can't smoke or do dope without it, and they will try to steal it from you. To prevent that, you have to buy protection with food. Give it to guys who you want to fight for you. The big guys you work out with. They certainly don't give a shit about you, but they do care where their calories come from. You can bet on that. Okay, got it, I said, picturing myself having to repeatedly hoop the lighter during cell raids. Anything else? Yeah, when the new fish come in, you have to take them to the toilet and watch them take a dump. Remember when I did that with you? There was a reason for that. The memory of when I first entered the range shot across my mind. Priest met me at the Sally Port, made me read the rules, told me to shower, then took me to the toilet and watched me. He had his hand over the flusher the whole time. Once I was done, he pushed me aside and took a rolled up newspaper and stirred the water, breaking up my waist. Then he told me to shower again. That's how the drugs come in. Some guys come in with suitcases up their asses and ruin the trade by driving down prices. You can't let that happen. If someone brings a suitcase in the bowl while you're quartermaster, you have to reach in and grab it, bang the guy out, then give the product to Bucky. It's his market. And don't worry about Bucky. He's got an army in here and will sort out any problems if it involves product. Got it? If you follow those rules, you'll be fine, Thistle. I assured Priest I understood, but I could see he wanted to tell me something more, something else. I waited patiently until he looked comfortable, then asked, Is that it, buddy? Is there anything more? Yes, he said intently. I've seen a lot of guys hurt really bad in here. Some go to the hospital, some die. You see this book right here? Priest pointed to his blue jail-issued Bible. This has a lot of power in it, and it can tell you a lot of things about people. I tried to piece together what a Bible and people getting killed in jail had in common, while at the same time hoping Priest wasn't going to get all religious on me. Lots of people end up here, Priest said. Some come to jail on remand, some on misdemeanors, some on transfer, some on breach, and some on really serious charges. Many of the fake cats brag about the crimes they've done. They do this to make themselves out to be badder than they really are, to intimidate others. They'll say they're bank robbers or jewel thieves or murderers, but really they just got caught with a dime bag of weed in their mother's station wagon at a traffic stop. Whatever they say, remember, braggers get daggers. Priest paused and looked down at the guys pumping water bags at the end of the range, dudes getting their swole on. But there are others inside who are real criminals, and there's a way to spot them. How? I knew what he was about to say was valuable. At night, when you're giving out tea for jug up before bed, look at people's bedsides. Look beside the beds of those punks who brag, then look at the bedside of the quiet guys, and you'll notice something different. What? The question jumped from my lips before I had a chance to stop it. Those in for real crimes, Priest said, the serious ones. They always have a Bible, Quran, Torah, or some other holy book by their bedsides. Night after night, they stay up trying to make it right with God. Don't fuck with guys like that. They'll straight up kill you. The fake criminals, on the other hand, sleep like babies and never keep Bibles by their beds because they don't need forgiveness because they ain't done nothing wrong. The real hard nuts can't sleep and can't help themselves from seeking God. They need forgiveness because they can't accept who or what they've become and what they've done or accept the life they've made for themselves. It's a really hard pill to swallow, to know you're a monster who's done monstrous things. They've got no other comfort than God. Somewhere along the line, it all went bad for them. I kept a Bible beside my bed, and I asked, what went wrong? priest. All us criminals start out as normal people, he started, just like anyone else. But then things happen in life that tear us apart, that make us into something capable of hurting other people. That's all any of the darkness really is. It's just love gone bad. We're just broken-hearted people hurt by life. There were tears in the corner of Priest's eyes. I could see for the first time the good man this muscle-bound criminal must have once been. The man he must wish he could still be. I felt a deep sorrow, knowing that he had no chances left. The Sally Port buzzer blared, and the guards came to collect Priest. He composed himself, gathered his pillowcase of belongings, dapped my fist, and said goodbye. I never saw Priest again. Someone told me that he'd been in for a homicide and a drug deal gone wrong, but I never did find out the details because that was something he never talked about, except, I assume, in private, between himself and God at night with a Bible resting beside his bed.
Amazing story. Remarkable man, Priest. That last paragraph, especially about somewhere down the line,
Yeah.
and people end up where they end up. And he
Yeah.
must have seen something special in you to be able to tell you that.
Yeah. I think he saw I was lost and confused, and I used to beat myself up. I was one of the guys that had a Bible beside my bed and begging God every night for a different life. You know?
But I think that's one of the junctures in the book, and there are many, when you think things have gotten so low for you, could they get even worse? And yet they do.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't get better after that. I kept his wisdom with me. I always remembered that. And I just kept getting in trouble. I kept, stealing. I kept, lying, doing all the things that I had to do to get my addiction, I was kind of over on the other side of it, though. Really, the turning point in the story is when I robbed the store and saved my leg. This is kind of on the downslope, but then it starts to go up slowly, and it's through education where I actually come out the other side.
But one of the, I think this turning point that you're talking about is when you steal something and you want to get caught and you don't get caught. You end up in a garbage bin covered with garbage.
Yes.
And what, for virtually no money?
No money. I was a horrible thief. So a little while before this time, in my encounter with Priest, I fell off a building and had a reconstructive surgery on my leg, and it got really infected. And because I was smoking and not taking care of it, and so I got desperate because I was homeless, bouncing around, and I thought, hey, well, if the state cares more about criminals and gives them a place to stay with medication and food, I don't stand a chance being a homeless person and not be having access to this. So I might as well commit a serious crime. So I went and I robbed a 7-Eleven with a hoagie in Brampton, Ontario. So with the submarine sandwich. Yeah. And then halfway through the robbery, I realized, holy shit, I'm robbing a store. I can't do this. And I ran away. And then I ran around the back of the building and I jumped in the dumpster and covered myself in trash while the police were effecting a search of the area. And I got away. I couldn't even rob a store and get caught properly. I got away. I didn't mean to get away, That's how pitiful it was.
But at what point did you decide enough was enough? I mean, as I said, you just think things can't get any worse, but they do. And you still haven't made the decision to change your life.
No, it was like a combination of a lot of different things. So hearing that what had happened to my dad went missing way back in the 80s. So I met some guy randomly at a shelter who told me that they got him, whatever that meant. But I never have figured this out. And so I've talked to my therapist, and she says that psychologically I was living my dad's life, like as an addict, as a homeless person, to give back my grandparents their lost son. So this is psychologically. And so when I heard that, kind of released me from searching all the different places that he would have lived in, right? Another part of that is when I got to rehab and I tried to do the program the first time I relapsed. And when I relapsed, my addiction was way worse than it ever was when I was bouncing in and out of the justice system. And so it was so bad that my body was failing me and I knew I was going to die, right? And in that, knowing that I was going to die, came a clarity of wanting to live. You know, I can't really describe it. The only way I've seen it in other people is when you see a loved one who's dying of like cancer, stage 4, and then all they want to do is live, right? It's something in our instincts as humans that happened to me when I was on the streets of Ottawa, where I just wanted to live again. And so when I went through the system the last time on a break and enter and Harvest House took me, I really knew it was my last chance, and if I didn't do it, I was going to die. And so I had to do everything to my best ability. And the two of those things galvanized and gave me kind of the almost like I was cast into space. You know, the energy I needed to get out of the orbit of the life that I was living into the new life where I was going. You know.
Mm-hmm. And it was in Harvest House that you learned to read properly?
Yeah. So I could read some like Toronto Star article, Sun, the Toronto Sun in jail, like the small sports sections or whatever. I could get the gist of it, but I couldn't read like a Globe and Mail. So it started in jail with my GED, sending away. And then I continued that at Harvest House where I would stay up every night, like reteaching myself how to like read properly at a literate level. And yeah, so that's where it started.
I have
Yeah.
trouble reading the Globe and Mail now, so I can understand why you couldn't read it then. But what happened the second time? I know you say in your book that nobody ever or gets through rehab the first time.
Yeah.
Why
No.
is that?
Well, a lot of people come and they think that nobody's had a life as bad as theirs. One, that's the first one. So it's the poor me complex. And so they don't ever open up, you know, and talk, or they think they know everything and they don't need to work the program because they're not that bad off, even though there's no stops left for them and they're in rehab because no one can tolerate them. So that's another thing. And I had both of those. I knew everything. I could get off drugs and alcohol, and I didn't need to listen to people, and I didn't need to read the Bible. I didn't need to do any of the stuff they were trying to make me do because I knew better. And of course, I relapsed, right? Thinking that I had all the answers. And when I relapsed, I almost died that time. So, yeah,
But then you go back for a second time
I do.
and you start to earn a degree. And what made you want to do that, first of all?
Well, it's a part that didn't make it into the book, so I'll give you guys like a little sneak peek. While I was on the streets the second time, right after the woman called me down from jumping off the building, that was another incident that made me change my mind. I bumped into a guy. I used to beg in front of the Rito Center. There's like buses and stuff that go there. And I'd go there every morning when I was dope sick and bum change. And I ran into this guy like 5 times prior and I gave him a different story as to why I was there every time. And so he just stopped me one day. He's like, dude, I see you shuffling around here, limping on your one side all the time. Why are you here? And I don't want those stories that you gave me because they're all different than the one the truth. What's the truth? And so the way he talked to me, he just talked to me like a human being. That was the first time in many, many months that anybody did that. And I just said, listen, Mac, I'm a drug addict and I'm going to get dope sick. And I come out here to get money so that I don't get dope sick.
Mhm.
And he's like, well, I'm a podiatrist. I'm a foot doctor. And I see you limping on your one side every day. And if you keep limping like that, you're going to ruin your neck and your shoulders, your posture. So what I want to do is buy you a pair of shoes.
Oh,
And I was like, that was like the kindest thing anybody had done for me. And I just looked at him. I said, because I'm a crackhead and you've been so nice to me, I can't take those shoes because I know I'll just sell them, you
oh.
know? And he's like, I don't care. You can do whatever you want with them. I just want to do something nice to you. And there was something in me. There was a line that I wouldn't cross. You know, I just said, no, I can't take your shoes because if I take them, my humanity will die. And that's the moment where I knew I would be okay. That was the moment because there was a line I wouldn't cross. And shortly after that, I did the robbery. I mean, did the break and enter and went to Harvest House. And too bad it didn't make it in there. I wrote it in a didactic conversation, which is different from the rest of the book. So it didn't make it through the final edits. But that was the moment where I realized that I could change, that there was hope.
Well, Jesse, you met Brian again, full circle, and told him that story. Maybe you'll meet the podiatrist
I hope
tomorrow
so.
and say, your
Yeah.
shoes that you offered me,
Yeah. And you know what he did after? He took me out to breakfast. That's what that guy did. And he just treated me like a normal person. And I must have stunk horribly, and it was just I wasn't taking care of myself. So
You know, one thing you point out that reminds me of this is that nobody ever called your name and said, Jesse Thistle. You know, you'd forgotten who you were. I mean, literally and figuratively, right?
yeah.
And you know, I mean, people say hi, Janice, to me all the time, or friends call and say, hi, Janice, how are you doing? But you didn't have anybody to say, Jesse, having a good day, you know? You forget that you even own that name.
Yeah, yeah, that's what happened to me because I was involved in a murder case that I brought. I told on the two guys that had done that, and that was some years before, and I was very paranoid, and I was homeless and unprotected for a long time. So I'd used to stay in shelters and on the streets, and I would give people fake names, for years like that, and just bouncing around being the lone wolf because I was afraid of, retribution because people were trying to kill me right after the trial. And so that damage that did of being nameless and afraid for so long manifested itself in things like I used to see creatures coming out of the shadows for me. And I was afraid to tell people my name. And having a name is so fundamental to who we are as humans, right? It's why we were given them. And the only thing that I've had that's similar to that is the way that in jail they give you what's called an Otis number, and you're known by that. And so, yeah, that was still one of the most haunting traumas from that time period. Is like knowing where you live and where the streets have no name, really, because you don't even bother to learn the names of the street. You yourself don't have a name. Everything just fades into gray, and.
When you were in Harvest House, you earned a degree that said university on it.
I
And
did.
what was that moment like for you when you saw that with your name on it?
Well, it was like the trumpets of Gabriel, like blew in the heavens or something. I felt like I don't know, like I climbed. I must have felt like Edmund Hillary when he first climbed Everest, because it was something for etiquette and like how to talk to people properly. It was a communications course, and they were reteaching me. They were rebuilding me, and then at the end of it, I got this cool certificate that said University of Ottawa on it. My name was on that, and I was already looking for an education, right? So like to see my name on something with university was so glorious. And it was just a piece of paper that was printed out like on Word or something. But the fact that it was given to me by Professor Tarion, like it's still one of my, if not my most prized possession beside my wedding ring, for sure. Like I hang that usually. We recently moved in here. I usually hang that above all my degrees. This like etiquette course,
And here you are, an assistant professor at York University. But that's the most meaningful degree that you got, was that first one.
Yeah, yeah,
When you
because it
were,
was a dream. It was a dream. It was a seed of a dream, a mustard seed of a mustard seed of a dream.
and and then you meet your wonderful wife, who
Yeah,
you knew for a long time.
I did. Yeah, I met my grandmother was passing away while I was in treatment. She had leukemia, and when she died, I made her promise that I would get my education and do as well as I could. And then I went back to Harvest House, and that the day that she died, 2 weeks later, I was graduated out of rehab. I went to what's called reintegration housing, and I got a computer. And on the computer, they showed me this thing called the Facebook. I'd never seen it before. I'm missing like a chunk of time here from like 97 to 2009, right? So the world had changed so much. And they were like, no, you just put your name here and then all your friends will come. It's like the modern telephone. So I put my name in and I got all these messages from all these people. And then I got one from this beautiful girl with red hair that I met when I was in grade school that I had a crush on back in the day because I liked red hair. I grew up with Tiffany. You remember the
Yeah.
artist Tiffany and Molly Ringwald and stuff? I was in love with them, right? And so there was this girl in my middle school who had this kind of hair. And then she could send me this nice note when I was just basically to watch out that I wasn't going to relapse, because she was my brother's friend. And we
Yes.
started talking, and we soon started talking at night, and I started sending her love poems. And I remember even getting ready to do calls like this. I would like half shower, make myself look clean and presentable. And behind me, I had like a wall of like cleaning products, like shampoos and deodorants and,
Mhm.
soaps, to show her that I too was clean like her, and I think it worked because I snagged her,
You did, you
Yeah.
snagged her. And and she helped you fill out forms so that you could apply to university.
Yes, yes. So yeah, I moved in. She was like a transition house for me out of when I graduated rehab. I went to go live with her, and I can't. At this point in my life, I don't know how to access like you know any kind of services, bank services, or
Mhm.
driving or anything. And so she helped me do all those things. She re-taught me how to do those things, and uh, with her help, she reintegrated. I guess they would call that a peer worker,
Mhm.
working with me as well as my lover and my everything. She was also this for me. And this helped me pay off all my fines. This helped me access doctors and set appointments, get my driver's license, and then eventually fill out my OSAP, which is in Ontario, student loans, and then get to university and help me honor the promise I made to my grandmother.
And then you meet these extraordinary people in Métis studies, and you become a research assistant, and then the book really gets takes
Yeah.
an unusual turn, and we all go on your next journey back home.
Yeah, yeah. I started taking Indigenous history classes because I knew that my addiction had something to do with me not being proud of who I was or even knowing who I was. And so I thought in those classes I might be able to get some answers to who my mom and her people were and who I am. And I came across this woman who, her name is Dr. Victoria Freeman. She had a class, Aboriginal history, that asked the students to contextualize their life within Canadian colonization. And that I phoned back to Saskatchewan to talk to my auntie, who was like a ancestry.com junkie. And she had all the family history written. And so I looked at it and I got to see who I was and my family. And this reconnected me with my kin, this assignment. And I handed in my paper and I did really well. And that Dr. Freeman actually, she said, I'm going to send this to my friend who's actually an expert in the people that's in this paper, Dr. Carolyn Podruchny. And she kicked it up to Carolyn, and I was supposed to meet Carolyn a couple weeks later, and she didn't even read my paper. So when I got there with my genealogy, she just sat me down and asked me to tell me about who my family was
Mhm.
from what I knew in the paper. And she knew instantly who I was. And then she's like, I got this big grant money from Shirk, and I want to take you out west to meet your family so you can understand the history that you're reading here. And so she did that. Carolyn really reconnected me with my kin. She's a great ally. And I know she's done this with other Indigenous students too.
What did that do for you going back to actually the physical space where you're from and your people are from?
Uh, well, I don't know. The land remembers you, right? The land remembers you. And my kin remembered me, and they were waiting. Generations of elders who'd seen us lost to the system as young kids were there waiting for 30 and 40 years for their children to return home. And when I came back, I was terrified. I didn't know what was awaiting me there. But I had to have real courage, I think. One of the first times in my life where had to have real courage, after my grandfather's death. But when I got there, they had barbecue. They had a barbecue for me, and there was a lawn chair beside my uncle's, and they didn't even ask me where I was. They just wanted to talk to me and share. They gave me a burger. I'm gonna cry thinking about this, man.
Oh, what a wonderful story. And you go back to the road allowance where your kokum and your mashum, I hope I pronounced that properly, your grandparents, where you were brought up as a little kid, and you go back to that same place. And as you say, the land doesn't forget you. And the imprint is there in the earth.
Yeah, yeah, the imprint's
Wow.
there. And I walked this along the train tracks where we picked Saskatoon berries when I was a kid. and their little old mud hut, rough shot with like lumber would all rotten away, and all there was is the impression of where it was. And so I remember going there and just all the memories of that place rushing back to me, memories that, parts of me had forgotten, probably to bear with the loss of what had happened. But when I was ready, they came back and I fell to my knees and I remembered who I was and who they were and who my people were. And I go back every year now back there. And I've actually even taken Lucy to the road allowance a couple of years later just to show the spirits of my Mushum and Cookum, my wife, the one who's taking care of me now. So,
Wow. I of course know the term road allowance, but I never knew till I read your book what it actually means and how important it is. And I'm so glad you told that story. Um, how did this come about? You know,
how?
yeah, like it. Where did the book come from? Did you suddenly say, "I'm going to write everything that's in my head"?
No, I'm an accidental author.
Mhm.
I'm just a guy who got out of rehab and stayed sober and went to university. But by going to university and studying my family history, I was there for a different purpose, right? I was there to discover who I was, to figure out my life. And in that, I excelled. I became from the lowest standing student in year one to graduating the top student at a 50,000 at York University,
Oh,
just because I was so interested in what I was studying, right?
yeah.
It's kind of unfair to the other students, actually. And in that, I won the Trudeau and the Vanier. These are the top two doctoral scholarships in the country. They're basically Canada's Rhodes scholarships. I won two of them simultaneously, and the Governor General for academic performance. And nobody at York's history had ever done that before. 60-year history, not Indigenous or non-Indigenous. So that created media attention, and the Toronto Star came to do something on my life just because I won these awards. And in that, the guy's like, "Hey, dude, you're a little old. What's the story here? Your grandpa." And I'm like, "Well, I had this other life. You see, I come from the streets in jail, and like, really, if you want to know my rise into this life, it starts when I robbed a 7-Eleven in Brampton." He's like, "What? That's the story." And so they put the story out of what had happened to me, and I got a call a couple weeks later from a lady or an email from a woman at Simon and Schuster. Her name's Adria, and she asked me to come in and to talk about the book, potential of doing a book. And I didn't even know what Simon and Schuster was, to tell you the truth. And so when I went in her interview, she's told me that they were very interested in potentially writing my story, and if I had anything written about my life.
Mhm.
And what I had written about my life actually was my AA program, right? From rehab. I had to do what's called the fourth step, your moral inventory, and write down all the things that had happened in my addiction that either made me shameful, that traumatized me, that, I did to other people as well as what people did to me, so that I could go back and make amends and make it right. And I had to do this for years to stay sober. And I wrote them all down and I put them on a blog, and I had other stories about my life, and I just sent those to them. And then they called me like a short time later and offered me a major book contract. So that's all the book really is. It's just my AA program of me trying to figure my addiction out. And so there's a lot of things in there I didn't think were for anybody else's eyes but my own, because I just wrote them myself to figure myself out. You know what I mean? And so that's all the book is. And I'm an accidental author, and other authors probably hate me because they didn't have to shop around my manuscript or anything. It didn't happen like that for me.
Well, as readers, we don't care because you being an accidental author is has given us some amazing insights into your life. I mean, you really are fearless, and it is the number one book in Canada. Is that right?
Yeah, for 2020, it's the best-selling book in print in Canada. Yeah,
Congratulations, Jesse. I
yeah,
mean, I walked into Shoppers Drug Mart one day and there was a huge display of this book. And I wasn't used to seeing this kind of book in Shoppers Drug Mart. So it's everywhere.
yeah. It's kind of like ironic. I'm in Shoppers Drug Mart and I'm not stealing Listerine this time, which is what I used to do to get drunk. So that's kind of cool. Sorry, I shouldn't have crossed that line there.
No, you have a good
Like,
sense of humor about yourself.
yeah.
To come
Well,
from where you've come and to be where you are today, you have to be able to laugh at yourself too, right?
oh yeah, yeah. And I tried to put that in the book too. There are some parts in there that were supposed to be funny.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
There are some moments, and I'm hogging all the airtime here because we have some questions, and because there's many participants, there's a lot of people watching and listening tonight. So here's a good question from Leah: what steps or continuous growth is necessary in your life to reconnect to your Indigenous roots?
Well, I do a lot of research with my family out west still with my mom and my Auntie Vaughn. That's going to be ongoing for the rest of my life. They're training me up to be kind of like a knowledge keeper. Um, I will continue to work within the university to study my people's history and document it. And I'm hopefully going to write the first academic monograph about road allowances from a road allowance person, which will be significant, right?
Mhm.
Telling our history from our perspective helps me connect back to my family. I have to repair the relationships that I have with my brothers because in many ways it's damaged. And I do that through reconnecting our history and trying to live in a good way through our Wakutuwan with them. Um, Another way to repair the damage and disconnection is to have my own kid. So me and Lucy are trying to have kids. We have 3 healthy embryos on ice for doing IVF. And I'm going to teach that kid to be proud of their indigeneity. I'm going to teach them about what a road allowance person is. And I think I'll have a better shot because they won't have to recover from their childhood like I did, right?
Mm.
And maybe they'll be a writer earlier than I was in life.
Well, I think you're going to get a lot of baby presents from all of us who've read the book. So,
I hope
uh,
so.
yeah, please let us know when that happens. Now that you're an educator, is there a teaching you've received from your students as you continue on your journey?
Yes, yes, there is as a professor, we know a very narrow window of something really deep, right? That's
Mhm.
what the PhD is. You go really deep and create new knowledge. But then they just throw courses at you where, you don't know everything. You have to look like you know everything. And then when you go into the university setting, if you act like you know everything, the students will expose to you that you know nothing, and they know. So really you have to approach the classroom like you're both learning about the subject. You know a little more, of course, because you've done your comprehensives and you've gone through like your training and whatever. But to admit to your students, I just don't know. Let's learn about this together. How do you think of this? And then share in an open dialogue, right? And I remember the professors that did that with me. Carolyn was one of them, and I now know why she did that because it gives you a connection with your students that's authentic, where real learning can take place. So I've
Wonderful.
learned that from my students.
Wonderful. How do you honor the life you had while living the life you have now?
Um, I always try to help. I look at the person that I once was, like, and I try to work in policy areas to help those kind of people. you know and so I wrote the definition of indigenous homelessness
Mhm.
that has gone on to change the housing and homeless sector in the country, and I know that it's steered millions of dollars to rehouse people. And so that's how I do what's called a walking amends. There are some people I can never go back and make amends because there's the damage is just too much. So how I do that now is in my everyday life. I will try to work in a good way that benefits society, and I do that through the Homeless Hub. I used to work for them, COH. I do it through the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. This is the largest homeless organization in the country. I'm going to be working with the CMHC to help them um, design and implement housing strategy, Indigenous housing strategy. And so I do that kind of work. And then I do this kind of education work, right? To teach people about my people's history and my own history. And yeah, there's just so many. I work with St. Michael's Hospital and I'm drafting guidelines for doctors to interact with homeless Indigenous peoples that they interact with at triage to avoid events like Brian St. Clair. He was ignored to death. He went into diabetic shock, and the people were racist and thought he was an alcoholic, put him in the corner. And I'm working with Dr. Janet Smiley to write guidelines so that doesn't happen. And so these are the different fields that I can work in with my experience, in both my lived experience and my academic training, to help save lives. And I'm not doing it perfectly, but I'm trying,
Mhm.
and I think that's the point.
So understanding is key.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Um, Here's something from Michaela. I'm a brand new school counselor. What is something that you needed as a young student that you wish teacher or school counselors could have said to you or done for you?
Well, I hope that they're all trauma informed now.
Mhm.
Youngsters who are acting out many in many ways are traumatized like I was. So I wish my early grade school teachers were trauma informed. I wish that there was access to sport. My grandparents were old and just didn't have the money or time to take me and my brothers to hockey or baseball. And I'm a big guy. I'm 260, and I think I'm made out of muscle still. When I was younger, I was even in better shape. And so I always say that if someone would have noticed me in grade school, maybe I would have had a great NHL career.
Yeah.
So that's one of my dreams. But like, yeah, and on a serious note, I think like those things like access to sport and then having trauma informed teachers are really important, and for young learners. And that's what I wish I had.
Did you read Richard Wagamese's book, Indian Horse, when he's
No,
talking
I haven't.
Gates?
No, no.
It's remarkable.
Yeah, I should. I will.
Yeah, it's remarkable. This is something, Jesse, you and I talked about before we went live, and that is you have so many books piled up behind you on the bookshelves. Um, if you chose three, well, this person wants to know if you choose three for us to read, which would they be? But it looks like you've got hundreds back there.
Let me see. I would say John Tay
Okay.
is The Northwest is Our Mother. This is the nationalist history of the Métis. Very important book, history book. Um, because a lot of people have read my memoir. It's about trauma and recovery. From a male Indigenous perspective, I would want people to go out and pick this book up. It's by Helen Knott.
Oh, yes, I know about this book. I'm just going to take a picture of it myself so I know.
Yes, incredible writer, better writer than I am. And her book is remarkable. And she's a poet too, as well as a social worker. And then the last good book, or the one that I always recommend, is the best Indigenous book I think that's ever been written. It's Half Breed by Maria Campbell.
Okay.
And this is, she's the first, they say that she's the GOAT, or us Métis say that she's the GOAT Indigenous writer, the greatest of all time, Maria Campbell, Half Breed. And this tells the story of road allowance Métis people as they were road allowance. So the generation before my mom, my
Mhm.
Cookham and Musham's generation. And she's actually from the same community. She's a cousin of mine. And my book can be read as a continuation of Half Breed. It's what happened to the children after we were let go into state care.
Well, that might just be my next book. And one of our participants is agreeing with you
Yeah. Yeah.
wholeheartedly. Um, do you perceive any relation between what some literary scholars call the structure of trauma writing and Indigenous storytelling structure?
I don't know. I haven't thought of that. I just wrote what I lived, and I don't even think I'm a writer, so I don't know if that applies to me. I'm just some guy who was lucky and had a chance to tell this story. So
What do you fear about having your story published?
I don't fear anything. I fear what I actually do fear is that been misread, and it's not all about trauma. It's actually a love story. It's a story about reconnection to identity, family. It's a story of Indigenous people in the 80s and 90s. A lot of us have similar stories, and so that's. I don't want people to only focus on the trauma, because really, it's about connection too, human connection. And, you
Yes.
know, that's really important. That appears as much as the trauma all through the book.
One thing you mentioned in the book near, or maybe I read it somewhere, houselessness isn't the same as homelessness.
No, it's not. Do you want me to elaborate?
Yes, please.
So, when I was working at the COH when I was in my undergrad, I was tasked with writing the definition of Indigenous homelessness. And I went around and consulted with Indigenous peoples all across the country and scholars who'd work with Indigenous homeless people. And in the consultations and looking over literature from Australia, New Zealand, the US, we found that the articulation of homelessness among Indigenous peoples was really about a disconnection from healthy relationships. So, relationship to family, relationship to land, relationship to identity, relationship to worldview and creator, relationship to our dances, our songs, all these things had been severed through colonial interruption policy. And so we articulated that and we came out with this definition that took uh, standard understandings of homelessness as being without a brick and mortar home and turned it on its head. And we said, actually, that's the result. The
Mhm.
real issue is the disconnection, but that happens beforehand. And so if you have all these disconnections, the chances that you become a chronically houseless later in life after are so much higher than if you're embedded within your social networks. And this understanding is actually an Indigenous way to look at homelessness that's now gone on to indigenize understandings of things like elder homelessness, because all of their social networks get destroyed over time just because people die and they end up isolated and then housing fails and they become homeless. Or veterans, a different way to look at veterans who are dealing with trauma coming back, all their social networks have been destroyed. And so that's real indigenization. That's a real way to, and I think in the future more and more people will look at homelessness through this lens, not just for Indigenous people but for everybody else.
So if you change the lens, Jesse, think of how much you've achieved.
Yeah, it's to me the I don't know, like I just try to live, man, and I'm just trying to be better than I was yesterday. I
Mhm.
don't even see it as really, you know, the things that I've achieved. I maybe have to rake my lawn tomorrow. That will be an achievement. It'll be better
Yes.
than having the leaves there. And so I just do that every day, you know.
So it's a
So
continuous journey too, right? The search for identity and who Jesse Thistle is and what you can be, who
yeah,
you can be.
yeah.
Do you have recommendations for organizations that support Indigenous homelessness or rehab specifically? Many popular organizations are faith-based. So what impact do you think that has on Indigenous people and their culture?
Um, yeah, faith-based can be bad, right? It can be a site of like massive trauma, especially if it's people that have gone or have a history or heritage that have gone through residential schools. So I would say the organizations that you could donate to that aren't faith-based, that bring that trauma are like Althosa in London. They do great work.
Do they?
Very underfunded. There's Nameres in Toronto, Native Men's Residence. Uh,
Can you spell the one in London? Because many people on
well,
tonight are from
I will.
London.
I'll spell it here. Yeah, Althosa.
Okay, Atlohsa.
Yes,
Okay,
and
great.
they're. Oh, yeah. Vanessa spelled it correctly. I spelled it wrong.
Oh, okay.
Althosa. Yeah, and or no, I spelled it wrong and Vanessa spelled it wrong. One of them's right. That's all I can say. They're good organizations. I would. What else? Let me think. Wabano in Ottawa is really good too. They people can donate to them. So those are just a few off the top of my head.
Well, that's great. I mean, we're getting a lot of comments from people saying how humble you are and that somebody said here, I completed the Indigenous course, Canadian Indigenous course through the University of Alberta. My eyes and heart are open, which is really nice. And thank you for clarifying homelessness and houselessness, the difference. You're such a powerful and engaging speaker. We're grateful for your authenticity. Liz says, I wish there was a way for so many more to read your book and listen to your words. So much emotion to feel in both. You've touched a lot of people, Jesse. And people are loving your stories. And one of the people watching, listening wants to know if you're going to write another book.
I am, actually. I am. There's special brewings happening around From the Ashes. So keep your eyes out. It's going to be there. And I'm also working on a story that my uncle, great uncle Ronnie, was a man who was a professional bank robber in the 70s and 80s. And I'm looking at his life and what happened to him, and I'm fictionalizing it and writing a book about a bank robber as a reaction to colonial trauma. And that's the story of a lot of our men. They had their manhood taken from them through traumatic incidences in childhood, and then they react when they're older and steal back that agency, and they become like almost toxic masculine people. And many turn to crime. And so I'm going to write about that. And it's a topic that's apropos in Canadian society, because our rates of incarceration are so high compared to our percentage of the population. And it's due to this history of trauma and colonization. So
you're very close to your uncle Ronnie in the book. You live with him at some point, and he looks after you. And even when you're a young kid, you looked up to him and you kind of strutted down the street with him, wanting to be as important as he was.
Yeah. Very important central figure in our family. He's like a mythical guy, so.
It has been, well, one, let me mention one more here. Hi, Jesse. Miigwech. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Miigwech. For your vulnerability again and again. When I first went public with my history of addiction, I was told that this was the beginning of a living amends to my community. Have you ever considered that your book is a living amend, not only just for you, Jesse, but for the collective trauma of Indigenous addiction?
No, I haven't. Thank you for giving me that teaching, whoever you were. That's a profound way to look at it, because in my Wakutawan, there's been that's our relation. We're supposed to see our relations in equal, and sometimes sharing a memoir is about narcissism, right? You're talking about yourself for 300 and something odd pages. So for her to, or him to say that it's really you're a voice of the collective community, that makes some sense of why or this opportunity came to me. So I thank you for whoever gave me that teaching.
Her name is Vanessa Amptman Smith.
I know Vanessa.
Oh, you know her?
Yeah, she's a Trudeau scholar. Yeah, she's a brilliant scholar.
Oh, just like
she
you.
Just put out her first article.
Okay, well, isn't that wonderful? I'm so glad that she's watching live. Well, Jesse, it's just been wonderful to have a chance to talk to you and to read your book, and for sharing your stories. I just want to give you a big hug, but it has to be virtual because of COVID, and also because I'm probably, about a 6-hour drive from you, but sending hugs your way.
Digital hugs for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a real treat to meet you, to talk to you, and to read your book.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Janice. It's been wonderful to talk to you too, and to share with all you all watching. So hi.
Stay on your journey. Let us know when you have a baby so we can send those gifts over, okay?
For sure. You guys can help me pay for hockey equipment. All right, take care.
Good night on behalf of Words and Josh Lambier and the festival. Thank you so much, Jesse, and to everybody who dialed us in tonight.
Bye.
Good night.